Hello, I'm Chris Lapadoulos of Thanastasiopoulos. This is Man Free World. The tech support guy, he actually showed up, but I had to go to the bathroom and I missed him by literally must have been seconds. I saw his van leaving, so he'll be showing up soon. Anyway, I wanted to talk about today this video I saw, an article that came out about 2 weeks ago. Fair use, by the way. Go give Zeroth a like and subscribe. He's got good stuff. About MIT News desalination desalination. This new technique produces fresh water. This is bad English, Jennifer Chu. Desalination produces fresh water cheaper than tap water. Engineers at MIT and in China are aiming to turn seawater into drinking water in a completely passive device that is inspired by the ocean and powered by the sun. The configuration of the device allows water to circulate in swirling eddies, like up through this device. It has this like heating temperature gradient that gets taken in by the sun, and there's no like filtration process. It's more of a separation process, which we're going to get into in a second. And basically, these eddy currents come up with fresh water, and the salt water falls to the bottom because it's heavier. I think that's how this is all working. So the circulation combined with the sun's heat, which drives this whole process, drives the water to evaporate, leaving the salt behind. I guess there is an evaporation at some point. The resulting water vapor can then be condensed and collected as pure drinkable water. That's pretty much how all the solar stills work. In the meantime, the leftover salt continues to circulate through the device rather than accumulating and clogging the system. So that's the breakthrough, is it doesn't clog. So let's get into it.
I recently read about a desalination breakthrough that got me looking deeper into water issues. As you may know, most of the water on Earth is in the sea, so the obvious solution seems to be desalination. However, current methods of desalination aren't without their challenges. But now a team from
and then this is one of the main problems of just having a livable place, and the pollution levels are getting to be a little alarming. So we got to get the water from somewhere else if we're gonna, have a good quality life and maintain this level of population, which I think we should actually grow a little bit more, and we'd have some more technological breakthroughs like we're having right here that will solve a lot of these issues, and then we'll just naturally want to peter out around 10 billion.
From MIT and a Shanghai university have potentially solved them. During my research for this video, I came across Kiribati, a country of islands in the Pacific between Australia and Hawaii. For the people of low-lying islands like Kiribati, this new desalination system could turn the very thing that threatens them.
Yeah, that's it right here. So this is like the water in here, and it kind of percolates up through this device and creates the fresh water
into a lifeline of fresh water production. Kiribati might seem far from home, but even for parts of the US and UK, this new device could provide cheap fresh water from the oceans in times of hot sun and no rain. And according to the researchers, all at a cost below the average price of US tap water. Inspired by the sea and fueled by...
Yeah, that's the whole problem with all these other systems that are super costly, but this one's really not at all. It's pretty, actually, amazingly straightforward.
The sun. This is a very exciting breakthrough for a team who have been working on desalination technologies for some time. So let's get to the bottom of how this all works. Of course, desalination itself is not a new technology. It can actually be dated back to the ancient Greeks. They would boil salt water, turning it into water vapor, and then collect the fresh water that condensed.
Right, this is how you can make a water still. Like, you can survive on it if you had like, those little man-made ones where you can make them out of a puddle of. Yeah, there's ways of using plastic bags to make these stills, which, in a survival situation may work, but oof.
This is a simple type of thermal distillation, as thermal energy is the driver of the whole process. Thermal distillation still makes up around half of the global market, but usually in a slightly more advanced manner. For example, multi-effect distillation. Think of multi-effect distillation like a chain of steps. It starts by turning salt water into water vapor in one chamber. Then it uses the warmth from this vapor to heat up salt water in a second chamber. This makes the water in the second chamber turn into vapor too. The vapor from the second chamber goes on to do the same thing in a third one, and so
they're just using a thermal gradient to make it more efficient. Okay.
One. So the heat in the vapor that would normally be wasted in one chamber is instead used to heat the water in the next one. Pretty neat. From what I could find, the other main technique is membrane-based desalination. An example of membrane-based desalination is reverse osmosis.
This is the one that's used a lot all over the place, but it's expensive because you have to scrape the freaking salt off the side.
Osmosis, where the seawater is filtered through a semi-permeable membrane to filter out salt and other substances. This is done by pressurizing the salt water on one side of the membrane, which starts forcing it to pass through. However, the pores in the membrane are too small for salt ions to go through, so only fresh water makes it to the other side. From what I can see, reverse osmosis desalination is the method currently being used in Kiribati, but that's not actually how they get most of their water, and it's not the method used in the new system from MIT and Shanghai. Kiribati is made up of 32 breathtaking coral atolls strung around seawater lagoons and one reef island. It's home to over 100,000 people and is the only country in the world to be in all 4 hemispheres.
That's pretty cool.
Like other low-lying islands, Kiribati is on the front line. Sea levels are rising and the fresh water is disappearing. In the past and
Okay, the fresh water is disappearing. I can see that, but give me the break about the salt water levels rising, dude.
till today, Kiribati has relied on underground water from rain that seeps into the porous limestone and coral sediment substrate. The fresh water floats on deep pockets of dense seawater and
That's how most wells work, okay?
pushes it down to form stores of fresh water shaped like lenses. As more rain falls, lenses thicken. These lenses have been
Wow, lens, okay, it's just where the water's being kept and held on top of some volcano.
stable and reliable source of fresh water. But things are changing. Rising sea levels make lenses less likely to form, and extreme weather brings giant waves that flood them with salty water.
Okay, that's been happening forever. Yeah.
Water scarcity in Kiribati is also compounded by development. Most people live on South Tarawa, and it's more densely populated than Tokyo. For many households, harvesting rain is the only way of getting fresh water. But if there's no rain, which happened recently in a period of prolonged drought, there is no fresh water. It may seem like a distant example, but Kiribati is only one of many places with water issues. According to the IPCC, half of the world's population already experience severe water scarcity for part of the year. So what can we do? Desalination to me seemed like the silver bullet. I mean, 97% of Earth's water lies in the oceans. So if we just remove the salt, problem solved.
Well, not really.
Right? Already islands like Malta, the Bahamas, and the Maldives get most of their water from desalination. Worldwide, one study estimates daily production of fresh water from the sea to be around 95.
So one of the things that could solve this is if we allow the nuclear power plant stuff technology, which looks like it actually is moving forward. It seemed we got a green light a couple of years ago. So we'll see what happens with that. That makes a lot of these issues moot. If we have enough electricity and it's cheap enough to run these plants, we'll call it these plants. I mean, it's the electricity that costs the money. It's the heaters and like the maintenance costs. So robotics, the next gen technologies on these desalination stuff, and free cheap electricity would solve it. But maybe not. We don't need to do that. Maybe we can use this thing.
Million meters cubed. That's enough to fill the Great Pyramids of Giza about 36 times every day. So what is stopping Kiribati from just completely relying on desalination? Before getting to that, I have to tell you about this other awesome water-related technology, and that is the 8-sleep pod. I've recently been trying to optimize especially to control it of the bed in and in the morning, and thermal alarm. The 8-sleep is the world's desalinated and is also heavily, so it can require expensive first big plants pumping us, and that's the cost. It's not surprising that half pod cover. Now back to desalination, which has a few problems for Kiribati. The first is more obvious, and that's the cost. It's not surprising that half the world's desalinated water is produced by wealthy countries in the Middle East. Big plants pumping water from the sea to land are expensive to build. Distillation is also heavily energy intensive, and although reverse osmosis uses
Well, yeah, it's just you gotta burn something to heat up this shit and pump it and
is less energy, the salt that's removed accumulates and clogs the membranes, so it can require expensive maintenance. A case in point,
if there was an easier way to purge these systems instead of those cylinder membrane things, if they had a different technology to purge it or something, I don't know. Maybe this is what we talked about.
is a raised reef island of Kiribati called Banaba. During the long drought a couple of years ago, 2 desalination plants were built. Both broke because they cost too much to run and maintain. Banaba suffers the same weather extremes and droughts as the rest of the country, but also has a second problem. It's very rich in phosphates, and historical mining left lasting damage. One article I read said that by 1979, when mining was stopped, 90% of Banaba's surface had been stripped away. Mining also pretty much completely destroyed all of their underground freshwater reserves or filled them with hazardous waste. So for the 300 or so people living back on Banaba today, there is no source of fresh water apart from rain. Besides the financial and energy costs, another problem from traditional desalination is the very salty brine that it leaves behind. The hypersaline concentrate that's left behind from desalination can be twice as salty as the ocean water. This is often pumped back into the sea without being properly treated, creating low oxygen, high temperature dead zones.
I mean, okay, that can be changed, all right.
Where nothing can live. And the thing is, conventional desalination actually produces more brine than it does fresh water. If the daily production of desalinated water could fill up 36 Great Pyramids, the amount of hypersaline concentrate created would fill 54. Researchers in Saudi Arabia are working
to have more brine to get the water out. That's just kind of, I mean, that's how it works.
On mining the hypersaline waste for sodium chloride salts, magnesium, calcium, and other minerals. But this probably isn't going to help places like Kiribati. Although there are plans in Kiribati for a grant-funded desalination plant, it would be great if there were cheaper options that had less issues with hypersaline wastewater. On top of that, if the problems of salt accumulation and clogging the membrane could be solved, it would be a real game changer. Well, that's precisely what the research team from MIT and Shanghai have been working on. The breakthrough came by applying the principles of deep ocean circulation on a micro scale. The oceans have a complex global network.
I think they're being a little goofy here. Ooh, it's a complex network. Okay, no, it's just the way water circulates.
Of current circulation, driven in part by differences in temperature and salinity, known as thermohaline circulation. Thermo means temperature and haline salinity. I think I'm pronouncing those words right, but apologies if not. In the deep ocean, it's the salinity and temperature of the water making it more or less dense. Around the poles, the formation of ice makes water more saline and more dense, so it slowly sinks down. This downwelling creates deep water masses that move along ocean basins towards the equator, where they warm and upwell to the surface, causing it to evaporate. What's left behind from the evaporation becomes saltier and more dense, so it starts to sink back down again. Through this movement of thermohaline circulation, surface water is continually replacing deep water. It moves marine nutrients and heat around the planet. It's often called a conveyor belt because it's a significant driving force for energy and species transportation. Before making their breakthrough inspired by this effect, the team from MIT and Shanghai have been working on a few other desalination systems powered by solar radiation. This use of solar radiation is important because using energy directly from the sun is much cheaper and more efficient than turning it into electricity first. These desalination systems that are using solar radiation also have membranes, just like the reverse osmosis system we looked at before. But these membranes are different. They're hydrophobic, which means they repel water, so no liquid water, whether it's fresh or salty, can get through them. What can pass through is water vapor.
Interesting. That's pretty cool. When I first watched this, I didn't understand that part. Now I get it. So they're using a hydrophobic membrane to repel the water, so only the vapor gets through. I didn't know it worked like that. That's pretty cool.
This membrane works because when the salt water heats up, it evaporates and turns into vapor. This vapor then moves through the membrane and turns back into fresh water on the other side, leaving the salt behind. The first device from the research team did work, but the salt and turns back.
That's pretty cool.
Back into fresh water on the other
because I can just scrape that stuff off, and that's
side, leaving the salt behind. The first device from the research team did work, but the salt it left behind quickly clogged up the system. Their second device was able to mitigate some of this, but it had a very low rate of freshwater production. But once they applied the principles of thermohaline convection, everything changed. Their third attempt was just right. A bit of a Goldilocks moment that resulted in a device directly powered by the sun's radiation that produced high volumes of fresh water, and most importantly, doesn't accumulate salt that clogs the membrane. So how exactly does this work? Well, there's a lot going on here, but I've tried my best to distill some of the core concepts. The whole system is contained within a box that is submerged underwater. Due to gravity, the water pressure at the bottom is higher, so it forces water up to the top through a number of tubes, one for each layer or stage.
Neat. So it's going up through here, and then comes back down through here, and rolls around. Okay.
Of the device. If we focus on one of these layers, we can see that they are made up of a top and bottom section. As the salt water flows up into one of the layers, it is confined in the thin insulated top section that's quickly heated by the sun, so the water starts to evaporate. The vapor that's formed then passes through the hydrophobic membrane into a bottom section. In this section, the vapor condenses and cools into fresh water where it can run into a collection pot. What's left in the top section is now a slightly concentrated, saltier bit of water that has started to cool. Now, instead of leftover salt starting to accumulate and clog up on the membrane, the thermohaline effect starts to cause currents that wicks it away from the membrane. With a little help from the angle of the device, the thermohaline effect creates these small eddy currents. These keep pushing new water to the warm part of the top section and keep the salt in circulation, transferring it away from the membrane. Stopping the salt clogging the membrane is the big breakthrough of this research project because it makes the system highly efficient and reduces maintenance costs significantly. The reason for having multiple layers is similar to the thermal distillation system we saw earlier. The heat in the bottom section of one layer that would otherwise be wasted is instead used to start heating and evaporating water in the top section of the layer below it. Tests on this ingenious distillation device showed amazing results. It solved multiple problems at once. Record high water production efficiency, extreme resistance to salt accumulation. It also runs on its own for 180 hours without any reduction in performance. All of this makes this method of freshwater production cheaper, say the researchers, than US tap water. I'm not sure how their estimated cost of 1/5 of a cent per litre compares to the tap water in the rest of the world, but I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. But beyond this cost estimate, having a passive device powered by the sun with high efficiency and no salt accumulation for clogging is amazing. What's more, because the device is tilted, it also means that saltier water starts to sink to the bottom because it's denser. This naturally flushes out salty water from each layer before it can become hypersaline and damaging to the local ecosystem, solving yet another problem.
Interesting. So instead of letting it all briny, it just gets a little less salty, or a little bit more salty, just a little bit more salty for the water that's getting taken off of it. So, I guess that's a good thing. There's other ways of handling that brine situation.
Researchers say that a device scaled up to the size of a small suitcase could produce up to 6 litres of drinking water per hour. It could also apparently run for several years before needing maintenance. So small-scale, infrastructure-like devices for households could become a real possibility, and a lifeline for places like Kiribati. As you're still watching, please subscribe to the channel, as I think you'll like some of the other videos I make, like this one on bionic propellers inspired by nature.
Wow, well that's interesting. So it looks like if this thing can scale up, it looks like they say it can. I don't see why I couldn't if that actually works the way they say it does, which sounds like it should. Maybe that's a way of solving some of these problems with having water around the place, trying to dig it out of the earth all the time. I was just get it from the big source. All right, I'm Chris.